In that letter he gave me the story of his life, of his marriage and consequent disinheritance, and of the yet greater sorrow which followed shortly, which led him to voluntarily exile himself from his beloved England, and which finally led to his sacrifice of the love and companionship of his only child. As Harold Mainwaring paused, Mr. Sutherland remarked, "I, myself, have seen the letter to which the witness refers, but I consider it of too personal a nature and too private in character to submit for examination. I will say, however, that both my honored colleague, Mr. Barton, and myself have compared it with other letters and documents known to have been written by Harold Scott Mainwaring, the elder son of Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring, and have found the writing in all cases identically the same. There is yet one more question which may have a bearing later upon this case, which I will ask the witness. Mr. Mainwaring, have you, during this time, received any clue regarding the identity of your mother, or is that still unknown to you?" With great deliberation, the witness replied, "Until within the past 3 or 4 days, I have known absolutely nothing regarding even the name of the woman whom my father made his wife, or whether she were still in existence. I have recently learned, however, that she is living, and," he added more slowly, "I know that she is present in this court room." It was afterwards recalled that, as the witness resumed his seat, a curious sound, something between a gasp and a sob, was heard, but amid the tremendous sensation produced by his last statement, it passed unnoticed. With very little delay, Mr. Sutherland announced the name of the last witness, Frederick Mainwaring Scott. Again the silence deepened as the white-haired gentleman, with great dignity, took his place upon the stand. His heavy, sonorous tones rang out over the court-room, while from time to time the piercing eyes beneath the beetling, snow-white brows sought the face of Ralph Mainwaring with their silent but unmistakable challenge. At the first sound of his voice, Mrs. LaGrange's agitation increased perceptibly, her expression changed to abject terror, yet she seemed unable to move or to withdraw her gaze from his face. To the question, "Where were you born?" the witness replied, "I was born in London, but for the past 45 years have been a resident of Melbourne, Australia." "Are you not connected with the Mainwaring family?" "Distantly. The Scott and Mainwaring families have intermarried for many years, but I have waived all claims of relationship for nearly half a century." "Were you acquainted with the Harold Scott Mainwaring mentioned in this will?" "Intimately acquainted with him, as we were associated together in business during his entire stay in Australia." "In what business were you engaged?" "In the sheep business principally. We were also interested in the mines." "For how long a time were you associated together?" 6 years, or thereabouts." "Mr. Scott, you are the foster father of Harold Scott Mainwaring, who has just preceded you upon the witness stand, are you not?" "I am, and have been from the day of his birth." "Will you state the circumstances under which you became his foster parent?" "Harold Scott Mainwaring, the elder son of Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring, came to Australia within a year after the marriage for which he was disinherited. His reason for leaving England was not, as many have supposed, on account of his father's severity, but because of the discovery of his wife's infidelity, after all that he had sacrificed for her. He brought her to Australia, in the vain hope that, removed from other influences, the influence of his own brother in particular, she would yet prove true to him. Within the following year his son was born, but before that event he had fully learned the character of the woman he had married, and he determined that no child of his should be disgraced by any knowledge of its mother, or contaminated by association with her. To my wife and myself he confided his plans, and as we had no children of our own, he pledged us to the adoption of his child while yet unborn. An old and trusted nurse in our family was also taken into the secret, but not the physician employed on that occasion, as he was a man of no principle and already in league with the false wife against her husband. When the child was born, Mrs. Mainwaring was very ill, and the babe received comparatively little notice from the attendant physician. A dead child, born but a few hours earlier, was therefore easily substituted for the living child of Harold Mainwaring, while the latter was secretly conveyed to my own home. A few weeks later the child was privately christened in a small church on the outskirts of Melbourne, and the event duly recorded upon the church records. He was given his father's name in full, Harold Scott Mainwaring, but until his 21st birthday was known among our acquaintances as Harry Scott, the same name by which he has been known in your city while acting as the private secretary to Hugh Mainwaring." "Are you familiar with the letter written by Harold Mainwaring to his son?" Perfectly so. He gave it into my keeping on the day of the christening, to be given to his son when he should have reached his majority, if he himself had not, before that time, claimed him as his child. You can then vouch for its genuineness?" "I can." "How long a time elapsed between the birth of this child and the death of Harold Mainwaring, the father?" "About 5 years. He left his wife soon after the birth of this child, and spent the greater part of his time at the mines. He finally decided to go to the gold fields of Africa, and a few months after his departure we received tidings of the wreck of the vessel in which he sailed, with the particulars of his death at sea." "Mr. Scott, did you ever hear of the existence of this will?" "Not until the boy, Harold, learned of it, soon after he entered Oxford." "Do you know how he first heard of it?" "He heard of it from Wilson, one of the old servants on the Mainwaring estate, who recognized in him a resemblance to Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring, and learning of his identity, told him the history of the will." "You have been kept informed of his search for the will and of its final discovery?" "From the first. Though the boy has a good bit of money in his own name, I will back him in getting his rights to the very last pound in my possession, and that," he added, while his dark eyes flashed ominously, "will outlast the bank roll of any that can go against him." "Have you any further direct evidence which you can produce in support of the identity of the claimant?" "I have," the witness replied, and having taken from his pocket a large memorandum book and extracted therefrom a paper, he continued with great deliberation: "I have here a certified copy of the record of the christening, at the Church of St. Bartholomew, on June 24th, 18 , of Harold Scott Mainwaring, the first-born son of Harold Scott and Eleanor Houghton Mainwaring." A piercing shriek suddenly rang out through the hushed courtroom, and the crowd, turning involuntarily at the familiar name of Eleanor Houghton Mainwaring towards the seat occupied by Mrs. LaGrange, saw that wretched woman sink, with a low, despairing moan, unconscious, to the floor. As several sprang to the assistance of the unfortunate woman, Mr. Scott, turning swiftly towards the judge, exclaimed, "There, your Honor, is a most unwilling witness, but one who has very effectively confirmed my testimony." The greatest confusion followed, several women having fainted from nervous excitement, and as it was then nearly noon, the court adjourned until the afternoon session. End of chapter 20.